Good afternoon. I'm Jane Harmon, a recovering politician and president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and absolutely thrilled to welcome today's guest. In fact, it's a tweet to have Estonia's, did you get that? Should I try that again? It's a tweet. I thought of that myself. To have Estonia's president, Toomas Ilves, here today. He's, by my lights, the world's first and best e-president and a forward thinker on all things digital. In response to incredible challenges, Estonia has set up something really remarkable. When the Soviet Union fell, Estonia built a brand new government, and they built much of it in cyberspace. They've expanded it, upgraded it, and defended it, even in the face of serious Russian cyber intrusions. In 2007, Russian hackers threw everything they had at Estonia, taking down websites and cell networks, banks and broadcasters. 8 years after the world woke up to the prospect of cyber war, we're proud to have President Ilves here for a conversation on free, secure, and prosperous networks and whatever else he wants to talk about. I took it as a sincere compliment that he sought out the Wilson Center for this dialogue. Like the true digital natives we are, we'll be webcasting the event live and tweeting it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask your grandkids. They're the first generation fully steeped in cyberspace. Today, lives worldwide are more vulnerable than ever to digital disruption. The world has more mobile phones than toothbrushes. Not kidding, folks. Our infrastructure, rail switches, water mains, power grids is increasingly networked. That's an incredible vulnerability, as well as an incredible engine of prosperity. Estonia's example shows that ensuring liberty and growth online is a positive-sum game. We'll have more of both or we'll have neither. But crafting a secure global internet is a huge technical and leadership challenge. Here in the United States, this issue is just starting to get the attention it deserves. The last few months have been full of high-profile hacks. The scariest one, I think, was the sophisticated effort that took down France's TV5 2 weeks ago, an intrusion claimed by ISIL sympathizers. Thanks to the black market, exploits and malware are available on the cheap. For cyber terrorists, the limit isn't resources anymore, it's creativity. We need to be at least as savvy securing our digital assets against assault. There's hope for bipartisan action in Congress. Let me repeat that, on many fronts, actually, but there's hope for bipartisan action in Congress on this issue. Committees in both houses, by large margins, have moved bills that make it easier for private firms to share threat information with government agencies. It's Cyber Week in the House of Representatives, and floor votes are expected on measures to give the private sector liability protection for sharing information about malware or viruses on their systems. And in San Francisco, right now, the RSA conference, one of the biggest security forums, is meeting. So today's conversation comes at a critical moment in the cyber debate. The biggest challenges are cultural. Silicon Valley is staffed with digital natives. Washington is stuffed with digital dinosaurs. Not a bad line, right, folks? Politicians are analog, except it seems, in Estonia. So we're thrilled to host President Ilves for today's important dialogue on building a better internet and whatever else he wants to talk about. It's a real privilege, and the plan is that he will talk for as long as he wants to talk, and then we'll see whether I ask him any questions, but there will be time for you to ask him questions, and please ask questions, don't make statements. Finally, let me say, some of us just had lunch with him. What a rare treat. And he comes to this with a huge life story, most of it in the United States before he moved to Estonia and became Estonian ambassador to the US. And we just talked about his kids, one of whom, the oldest, is a true geek. And just today has a big article on politico.eu, which opened today. So the Wilson Center opens today to a charming and brilliant president of Estonia, Toomas Ilves. Please welcome him. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane, for your very kind words. You may be a recovering politician, but at least those in the audience who know anything about the EU know that all we do is harmonize our legislation.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Excellent.
I'm going to talk about cybersecurity today, but I would like, actually, more than at the lunch, talk about sort of the positive side of things. Because actually, why am I here in Washington? It does not, the reason I'm actually here in Washington is because I am co-chairing the World Bank's first ever development report dealing with IT, because the World Bank is finally, after 70 years, come to the idea that their IT might have something to do with development of society. Well, it's just that they've been the World Bank up till now is, putting money into irrigation projects, malaria elimination, all these other things, and then they started getting so many requests for IT projects, and they want to know what was going on, and then they looked at who's doing well, and the countries they've settled on, all of the ones that were doing really well, except for Estonia, were rich when they started, and we were not when we started. So then it became kind of a no-brainer to sort of say, well, Estonia maybe should be involved in this. And so that's what we're working on. Is that yesterday I spent a day and a half on a 300-page report on what it is that, what are good practices, what are bad practices, and what are the benefits of going over to, using IT and for development of society, and I'll try to talk about that later a little bit. And I'm saying that just in the beginning, because then all the other stuff that seems so horrible and dangerous, that there is this other side to this, which, the real side of it is that, in fact, you can make life so much better for people and in societies, that it's not all bad and evil, and we don't need to all go off grid. I remember a colleague of yours once said a cybersecurity thing, basically saying that, she has $60,000 planted in coffee cans around her house, and as soon as she stops being in Congress, she's going to go off grid. You don't need to do that, I think, and we have, I think our society's advanced a good deal thanks to the fact that we have made use of these various things. But on cybersecurity, it really is for the general public, it is a new thing. It is unfortunately even a new thing for much of what is the security policy world. While the sort of people not in the limelight have known for 30 years that there are all kinds of dangers, and I remember reading my first article about cybercrime in New York Magazine when I was an undergraduate, and that was about 40 years ago. But just to give an idea, in 2011, the Munich Security Conference had its first panel ever on cybersecurity. 2011. That was in last year. The journal Security Policy, which is kind of one of the ultimate academic journals on security, published its first article ever on cybersecurity. So it is coming into sort of broader discourse very slowly. And now everything is cyber. Everything is a cyber problem. And on top of that, we have this belief that every email you might be writing to your mistress in a language that no one reads, like in Estonia. I'm just thinking about some of the things I read in my home newspapers about, oh my God, they're listening to everything, and it's not happening, folks. But basically now there's this all-pervasive paranoia about everything being read by the NSA or someone else. I think that's misplaced, but we do need to think about security in the cyber world, given that we are moving over to something that I guess the professionals call IoT, but Internet of Things, where independently of our own computers, everything is being run by digital doohickeys would be the word, right? Everything. And there's no reason to think that that your refrigerator, which is run by computers, is not hackable, or something bad can happen to it, or your router, or all these things. These things can all be attacked, and they can all be used to do all kinds of damage if used by bad people. And so, looking at things more broadly, we see that many of the fundamental bases of what we think of liberal democracy are being challenged in this age, because on the one hand, we have people who are very smart in math and who don't really understand the foundations of a liberal society come up with solutions that don't really fit into our standard ideas that we've had in the West since, say, Locke, and which are enshrined in your Constitution and my Constitution, your Declaration of Independence, and basically the whole sort of liberal democratic world has accepted certain truths that we have a certain common set of assumptions that derive from the Scottish mainly Enlightenment, and also the French Enlightenment, and what we believe to be, and then privacy that came in a little later, mainly through the United States, but is now a fundamental tenet of Western liberal democracy. These things, when confronted, or when then, injected with the reality of cyberspace, where you can do things that were not possible in the paper age, we're at a loss. We don't know how to proceed. And that's, I think, one challenge that we face today, is how do we proceed in an era where things are possible that no one ever thought possible. There's this scene, I think, in Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers, where, I don't know, Athos tells Porthos, that they burn some paper from Lady D, or Madame D, and then they said, disperse the ashes, because who knows if Richelieu maybe has a way of reconstructing the ashes. But we're there today. I mean, we are there today, where in fact Richelieu has figured out a way of reconstructing the ashes. And so the challenge faced by liberal democracies is far greater than I think we have understood. Snowden has managed to make everyone paranoid, but Snowden's just a small part. I mean, the Snowden revelations, not Snowden himself. I mean, this is a small part of the kinds of things that we have to face. And then we also have to think, what does this mean for how we do liberal democracy? And liberal democracy just doesn't mean only privacy. It's, for example, we are all used to the internet. Because partially fueled by, or sort of fueled and sort of assisted by the Snowden revelations, for example, there's a strong attempt by unliberal, non-democratic societies to take control of the internet through the UN, through the ITU, which would lead to not only, the concept of, what they're pushing is kind of the old Westphalian notion of cuius regio eius religio, that if we have our own rules for the internet, and then what gets worse is that then the idea that we want to, you can't mention the Dalai Lama, for example, in one country, but maybe they want to push it so you can't have the internet, you can't get an internet search on Dalai Lama outside of the country that doesn't like Dalai Lama. There are many, so. Now, I think that these are the kinds of things we have to start thinking about much more seriously than we have. And unfortunately, not that many people are. Fortunately, the United States is one country that is thinking about these broader issues. I find in Europe right now, we all too often are encumbered by a paranoia about the United States and Snowden. That means that, it will, to the advantage of the United States, will lead to major restrictions on all kinds of things in the internet, that in companies and market access, that will all work to the disadvantage of Europe and to your advantage ultimately. But in any case, that's my problem there. Where we need to go, I'd say, is that we do have to understand, and I used this metaphor before, or this idea before, but there was an essay, which I think everyone should read these days because it's more relevant than ever. It was written by C.P. Snow, who was a British novelist and a physical chemist. The essay was written in 1959. It was called The Two Cultures. And it was about C.P. Snow describing how, as a professor of physical chemistry at Oxford, I guess, one of those two places, is that he would sit at the table and have dinner with the physical chemist and the physicist and the chemist, and then he'd go over and have dessert with the Shakespeare scholars, the poets, and the writers. But no one else could move back and forth. Now, where are we in society? I would argue where we are today is C.P. Snow's Two Cultures writ large. We have societies permeated and completely dominated by very clever digital solutions, devised by very clever people who design these wonderful things. On the other hand, they also figure out how to get into these wonderful things without really thinking about what it means. They haven't read Brandeis on privacy. Well, not that everyone should, but the concept of privacy, or what a liberal democratic society or what a government that exists at the consent of the governed may do to the governed. So there's a lack of understanding of that. And then on the other side, from my empirical experiences, well, I guess it's redundant, but from my experiences in dealing with legislators and with some government figures, is that they have no clue about the digital side or the mathematical side, which comes from, again, the lack of attention to the STEM subjects in all liberal democracies. Many more people want to learn public relations or something than people who want to take math. And so you get our cultures are diverging. The people who get it on the ethical, moral, and political side just don't really get the math. And the people who are doing the really smart stuff have not had they've never read Locke. So, and where's this taking us is that it's a potentially Hobbesian world of a war of all against war with no rules. Marshall McLuhan talked about in the 1960s the global village. And I think he got it wrong. He said, because, his idea is that we're all sitting on the couch looking at the Vietnam War, and we're seeing it live, and that it's a village. No, that's a voyeuristic. That's voyeurism. You can see what else is going, but it's not a village yet. Because in the village, there's a lady who knows everything about you and watches you walk out the door and knows when you come home and makes up stories about you. The internet has gotten to the point where that we are now in a village, in every possible way. Even worse, because I would say if you don't tape over your computer camera, people can hack into it and see what you're doing at home. At least the old lady in the village just didn't know what you did behind your own closed doors. So we are in a global village, and everyone can know everything about you. It is Orwell's 1984 vision of the television that also knows what you're doing. And so we're in a ruleless society. And a lot of people think it's really good. I don't know how many of you know who John Perry Barlow is, but he used to be the lyricist of the Grateful Dead. But then he's also, he was. Robert Hunter was before. But anyway, but he published this thing, which is in sort of hippiedom, or in sort of geekdom, is this called the Declaration of Independence of the Internet, which is 96. And he says, I'll quote it, to the sort of, to the squares. I used to be hip, but anyway. To the squares, that your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us, those of us in the sort of the cyber world. Again, property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. He left out privacy, which is, I think, an interesting thing for a hippie to say. But But this is precise. This, I would say, is a description of the Hobbesian state of nature, that no property, no expression, identity, movement, context, and we have to come up with a way of dealing with this because we want to live in a we want to live governed by at our own consent, not by the consent of a sovereign who's imposed by Gazprom or anyone else. And so we must be working toward a Lockean contract and an understanding of what it is that is possible and allowable in these societies. And it is, and especially in the days of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so forth, there have to be, of course, exceptions. But right now, I think we've gone too far. And so I guess one of the challenges we face is to get our own Locke, Jefferson, and Voltaire for the digital age. And that's some way of bridging this gap that I described. Now, let me just boast about my own country a little bit, because I think we've gotten some solutions to it over time. Not that we were actually, that we were intentionally brilliant. That was, a lot of it was serendipity. But certain things we discovered, because Estonia is, we were number one in internet freedom in the world. Now we're number two, because Iceland sort of tweaked this legislation a little bit. But that's Freedom House says that. We are by far the most, I guess we're number 11 in freedom of speech in the world. The US is like 34 or something, but we're a very liberal democratic country. And one of the additional benefits is we're also by far the least corrupt country of the post-communist world, and less corrupt than half of the European Union, including the old members. So in that sense, we're doing rather well, and I would ascribe a lot of that to IT. But our IT is, we've done things quite differently, because we've managed to, I would argue, have better security than almost anyone else, and at the same time maintain this, this genuine internet freedom. And here the solution, I say, is to really get certain key issues right. If you get those key issues right, then you don't have to be paranoid about the web. And you don't have to, you can feel secure on the web yourself. And the key, but it does run into some things that you have to face in the United States, because they'll pry the gun out of my fingers with my cold dead fingers. It's the same thing with this thing called identity, which is there are 5 countries in the world that in which the idea of an identity is absolutely anathema. It's 666, and that's the UK, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. There's in no way, never, no ID. Even the Supreme Court has said you can't, you don't have to have an ID. The problem is that in this digital world, unless you have a secure identity, you don't have any security. If you don't know who it is that is getting into your computer, or you can play someone else, you don't have security. There was this wonderful cartoon 20 years ago in the New Yorker. You've all seen it, 2 dogs next to a computer, and one dog says to the other on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. But that's the problem. There are all these dogs trying to get into your computer. Or you never know if it's a dog that's talking to you or not. And so you need an ID, an identity that is verifiable and secure, and so you know who it is that is getting into your computer, and so that the government service or whatever it is, or Amazon or whoever you're buying stuff, they know you're really you. You're not someone who's stolen a computer, you're someone's credit card, and so you need a secure identity. There are minimal standards for a secure identity. Those of you who are geeky, it is that you need a 2-factor identification. One is not enough. You need to have one way of proving who you are, and it has to match up with some other way of proving who you are. If the 2 match up, then there's a fairly high degree of certainty that you are you. And so what we do in my country, it's on a chip. It's half of your identity. It says, and the chip's pretty hard. It's not a 1, 2, 3 password. It is a chip with a complex thing there. And then you have your own number that you put in there that can be as long as you want or complex as you want. And then you have an independent verification authority that says, yes, this is all legit. And on top of that, you do it with something, if you're really geeky, is Pki Public Key Infrastructure, which is a sort of 1970s mathematical model of how to encrypt things used by everyone in the world today. A logical system, actually, more than simply math. But the point is that if you have that, then you have an identity that is secure, and that is how you can, in fact, trust the government's data, or you can trust the government to keep your data, and the government knows that only you are looking at your own data. There are a couple of other logical tweaks or legal tweaks that you can do, which we do, which is the most important one of which is that every citizen owns his or her own data. The data is not owned by the government. Your data are not owned by the government unless you have a civil contract in case you are silly enough to buy an app, and then they download all your healthcare records or whatever you want, how many push-ups you do, as I put in my computer every day. But I mean that stuff that is healthcare records, tax records, all these things that you do, banking, are your property. Now, once you have a secure identity system like this, you can do all kinds of wonderful things that are not possible elsewhere. You can vote online. I mean, this is, we don't know how you vote, but we do know that you are you when you vote. And we know that you have voted once and you can never vote. You can change your vote, in fact, but you can't have more than one vote. And then people say, well, how do you trust this system? But I say, well, I mean, given that we've voted 7 times, we've had 200 million digital signatures using the same system, and we have sort of hundreds and hundreds of millions of bank transactions using this identification system. So no one's stealing anyone's money from the bank. Why would they want to change an election? I mean, because, there are better ways. Or there are better opportunities. So anyway, that's one thing that can be done, that needs to be done, and unless you do it, you're not going to be safe. But the problem is that politically it's very difficult to do. I did mention the UK as an example, but even they, because of the failure of their original e-health system, came to see us, and Francis Maud, who's the government minister in charge of this process, actually finally said, okay, and they now do it optionally in the UK. They have adopted our system and said, okay, if you want real security, do this, but they won't impose it on anyone. The other thing that you can do is the architecture. That will also give you security. Our architecture is quite rare. It is, again, for the geeks, it's a distributed data exchange layer, but it's that all servers are all connected to each other through this identification system, which is different from what most companies have or most governments have, which is one big server. Because the other key aspect of security that you need to maintain sort of liberal democracy is that it's not enough to have a password or an identity to get into something. If you have just one big server, or the idea that once you're in, you can go anywhere you want. You can't do that in my country. Once you're in, you're just in one little place and you get one person's stuff, but you can't start moving around. The analogy is a castle, I guess, sort of if you get over the moat and into the castle, you can go anywhere you want. In our case, you can't go anywhere. And that was something we invented because we were poor. Because the government said, okay, now we got to get a big server farm, and they said we don't have any money. So then we had a software engineer figure out how to connect all of the computers using the ID system, and so that every computer has an ID, you have an ID, basically means that you can't go anywhere unless you're you. That's one way of doing it. I would argue to maintain liberal democracy. It also means that, there are drawbacks for the government. Because we have everything is encrypted, we will be facing problems in the future that, in fact, if you're a bad guy and you're using our system, we can't get in. And that's where, so we have these problems to face. I've now talked for far too long, or actually I've spoken for exactly half an hour, which was, so I'm going to just cut it off there and just answer your questions and your
Good.
questions, and then maybe.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. You know, I have presided over many Wilson programs. I've never looked out at an audience that was smiling for 30 minutes. And so I want to amend my little intro about you being the first E-president to you being the most charming and humorous president we've had. Also, I just have a couple of questions, and one comes from the lunch we had. I think you said this, and I think the audience would be fascinated, that there is a rule or a law in Estonia that if you put your information in the government once, you never have to do it again. Could you explain that? That seems, to anyone who lives in America, an amazing idea.
Okay, well, that comes out of the architecture. I mean, one of the things I didn't get to, but basically once, I mean, if you have this system where you have a concrete, guaranteed, verified ID, and you have these interconnections, that means if you enter your ID, then all of the stuff, your tax records, your whatever records, they're all there. You can check things up. And where it comes out in practice, say you need a permit for something, or you want to establish a building or a business. In most countries, you go there, you have to prove that the board, everyone on the board is free of a criminal record. They pay their alimony. They have whatever, all the things you have to do. They haven't been arrested. They pay their taxes. And so the way it works is, you have this piece of paper, and then it goes to one administration, it gets stamped. It goes to the next administration, gets stamped. This long serial process, and at the end of the process, I mean, in some countries in Europe, it takes 18 months to do that. But in our country, it takes 15 minutes because all of these things get zapped immediately. Okay, taxes fine, alimony fine, no criminal record fine. And so 15 minutes later, to get an approval, it's done because the information is there, and you don't have to fill it out every time because it is enough. Because the government has asked you once, therefore it knows. So that's a once-only law, and we're trying to get this through in the EU. Maybe when my granddaughter is retiring.
Okay, so question to the audience. How many want to move to Estonia? See that? Look what you did.
Well, you have to like cold weather.
Oh, we have to like cold. Well, we're used to that now. We've seen it, especially folks like Joe Nye in Boston have seen it. My last question, because I do want you to have time to ask questions, is about the underside of all this. You painted and there is a very good positive story, but there's also a negative story. There was the 2007 distributed denial of service attack. There also are folks out there, whether they're in Estonia or not, they're certainly here, who talk about a cyber Pearl Harbor. I mean, what's the bad story? And how did Estonia deal with it? And how much worse than that could it get?
Okay, well, what we were faced with, I mean, it wasn't actually that much. It was just the first time there had been a politically motivated attack. The attack itself never got into anything. The DDoS, or distributed denial of service attacks, are fairly common. They were common beforehand, but they're mainly used for extortion. We'll shut down your eBay thing here unless you pay us a lot of money. But this is the first time it was politically motivated. But you don't get in anything. No one else can get in. It's kind of like you can't get into a server. The interesting thing about that is the mechanism, because I would call it's a unique form of public-private partnership between mafiosos and governments in our case, because the way you do it is there are all these botnets, which are robot computers. Your computer, 25% of you in the U.S. have a computer that is running in its spare time Viagra ads. And what you do is you take all these computers that send out Viagra ads, then what you do then is you command them to attack one server, and then you just overload the server. It can't handle all the pings, and then it just shuts down, and then it says 404, which I make a little joke. 404 is the new 451, but as in Fahrenheit. So anyway, it shut our systems down, newspapers, banks, and so forth. Now, that's not cyber Armageddon. Cyber Armageddon is when you shut down the power supply in a country. You can do things in between, but you can say there's some guy sitting in jail in California right now because they were working for the Los Angeles traffic light authority, and they were, instead of going a strike, they turned all the lights red. And you think about it, good thing they turned them all red because you just create a traffic jam. Imagine if you turn all the lights green. I mean, so much of our lives today are run by digital devices, and they're all hackable. That's the real downside, and we just have to be worried about that. And I mean, these are the kinds of things we have to think about how to do. And certainly, in terms of as more and more as we go to IoT or Internet of Things, that is going to be a problem. The more when we go to automatic or self-driving cars, this is going to be a problem. I mean, all these, we have to think these things through is the issue.
Well, but while we're thinking them through, we do have an airline transportation system, and we do have internet connections that run enormously sensitive and dangerous things. So if someone transported you tomorrow to become Senate Majority Leader or Speaker of the House, and this is Cyber Week, what would be the first thing you would want to get done?
I would say that a topic which has not been in any of this discussion, especially the things that have been hijacked by sort of Snowden, is privacy. It's not privacy. Ultimately, if someone reads my blood type, I'm not so worried. I mean, I may not be happy. The real issue is integrity of data. Fine if you know my blood type. If you change my blood type,
right,
that's where you're really in trouble. And how did Stuxnet work? It didn't go in there and do nasty things. It changed the inputs to the computers controlling the centrifuges. Okay, I'm going to the ethics, the sort of political side of things. The point is what Stuxnet did was it manipulated the integrity of the data coming out of the centrifuges, giving the wrong number. Too little attention has been paid to data integrity, and a lot of the problems the biggest vulnerability, I would argue, is in changing outputs from machines, and then normal machines will be reacting to crazy signals, or your doctor will say you're Rh positive and you turn out you're Rh negative. These are the kinds of threats. So data integrity, I think, has to be addressed far more seriously than it has in an era we're all worried about privacy.
Okay, I could go on, but let's share the fun here. Questions from the audience.
Ariel over there.
Right in the middle here. Right here, sir. Please identify yourself.
Ariel Cohen is over there.
President Ilves, hi, I'm Tony Sennett, former resident of Tallinn, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Great city. I just wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about the NATO Cybersecurity Center and Estonia's role in that and the relationship?
And let's take a second question at the same time.
It's great to see you, Mr. President. A question about your large neighbor. Since Snowden defection, there was a little bit of a panic up to and including use of typewriters instead of computerized systems over there. And we are in a lot of friction with that place. You are more than we are, but also other places like Ukraine. What is your perception and assessment of what kind of nasties can we expect coming from there in terms of disruption of energy systems, maybe banking systems and other vital and life-supporting infrastructure that we all came to depend on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I can only commend you for your tremendous knowledge of this
What a
sector.
day or 2 days on that. On this, the NATO center, yeah, it isn't sitting there sort of figuring out how to attack anyone. It's its first publication 2 years ago was actually a legal analysis of how the existing laws on conflict apply to the cyber domain, because there are all kinds, I mean, you don't, unless you're in Donbass, shoot prisoners and prisoners of war, all this kind of stuff. I mean, how is it applicable? And there are places where it's applicable, and there are places clearly where it's not, because kinetic warfare, as it's now called, is different from digital. And so it's an intellectual operation, looking what does this mean? And you have international lawyers working there. Then you have people who know something about the digital world, but it is, as opposed to the propaganda that we get from that same Eastern neighbor. I mean, they're not sitting there figuring out how to attack anyone. And in fact, one of the issues more broadly is that, in fact, cyber in NATO remains a national thing. It is not there is no real NATO. I said, in NATO you have interoperability of weaponry. That means you can take a French missile and put it under a U.S. wing and vice versa. In the cyber world, we're still kind of in the intelligence realm where you share nothing, and so there's. I mean, I think that's something we have to get over, frankly. I mean, it's a challenge, and I think I've been talking about this for a couple of years already, is that we have to get out of this. This is a national intelligence thing. We don't share anything with anyone because the threats are cross-border, and it's that. In fact, if you're going to get hacked in Germany or in the United States or Canada or Estonia, it's the same people doing it, and they're getting in and they're looking for the same thing. You might as well sort of exchange more information, which right now is at too limited a level.
Yeah, that actually is the philosophy behind the bills pending in the U.S. Congress, that sharing information in the private sector and then protecting those who share against liability is a way to find out about attacks and prevent attacks. Excuse me for interrupting.
No, on Russia, who knows? I mean, I would say that virtually everything that's happened in the last couple of years, but especially in the last, last February, it goes beyond anything we thought possible, and more importantly, and this again is a completely different area, but beginning with the justification of the Sudetenland argument for annexing Crimea, which was basically sort of considered no longer valid after May 8th, 1945, the UN Charter prohibition of aggression or changing borders through aggression, the 1975 Helsinki Final Act, the 1990 Paris Charter. I mean, these are all ratified agreements that basically say you don't change borders for either because of co-ethnics or through use of force. Those have all been violated, and those are the fundamentals of Western security since the end of World War II. So everything we believed in is thrown out the window. The underlying bases no longer hold. So if you change the rules, I mean, this is not just a game changer. I mean, this is like there are no more. The rules are out. Everything we thought held true we can no longer assume that. So what does that mean? What can they do? I don't know. I mean, there are certain things we think a rational actor would not do, such as destroy the financial records of another country. I guess there was a discussion, would the U.S. do this to Iran? And the decision was made, no, or Iraq, one of those things. NQ, I don't know, difficult to understand. But anyway, no, but there was a decision, presidential level, saying we will not do this because we would be opening up a Hobbesian can of worms there that, if you attack some other country's financial system, wipe out their records, then all bets are off. And there's a certain assumption there are things you do not do. in the world of security, there are certain things you do not do, which now people do. And we don't know how to deal with that. So when you ask, what do I expect? I don't know, because if you throw out some of the rules, then you realize that you can throw out any of the rules. And that's where we are today, unfortunately.
Okay, way in the back, and then in the middle, near the back.
First of all, thank you for highlighting the need for
Please identify yourself.
Sorry, Jeremy Pesner, GSA. Thank you for identifying the need for those versed in both technology and policy. As someone pursuing just such a career, it really resonates with me. And based on your knowledge and what you talked about, it seems like you also identify such a person. So I was actually wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you've kept abreast of this field, learning what you've learned, knowing what you know, how others in Estonia have done the same, and what lessons we might be able to impart over here for our officials.
By the way, as we go to the second questioner, I asked what the median age of a person in government in Estonia was, and I think, was the answer 35 or was the answer 42?
The Prime Minister is 35. Well, it's under 40, basically. I don't know, it's hard to say. We haven't done it. Besides, they probably lose a job.
How many of you are under 40? All right, see? Second question was a few rows forward, right there.
Thank you very much. Patrick Sheehy. I'm an intern with the Congressional Office. I'm also trying to pursue a technical and policy career. And I wanted to ask again about that large eastern neighbor. In addition to the somewhat harder security concerns that they've unleashed, they also seem to be pursuing a very aggressive internet propaganda campaign. One that's often very hard to distinguish from just private citizens expressing their views. In an open democratic society, what sort of danger do you think this poses to the political process, if any, and how do we counter against that, if we can?
Okay, well. On the first question, what I've been pursuing for 20 years, and actually my first step into policy in my own country was, you got to start teaching kids early. You got to make sure kids study math. And it came from my own experience. I had a math teacher 40 years ago. No, 38 years ago. Yeah.
He's counting
you know, it's
on his
math
fingers,
now.
to be sure.
I was, yeah. 48 years ago. I'm 61. Anyway. She taught a group of kids in my middle school how to program. All the other kids who did that are now rich, but anyway, we learned how to program. We programmed BASIC. I mean, it's a very primitive, sort of simple Fortran type language. And from there on in, I was never afraid of computers. And when I was an undergraduate, I actually programmed you would not believe this, but a PDP-8 that had 8K of memory, which is basically an empty email. But since it was so small, you had to program in assembler language in hexadecimal, so 16 numbers and letters. And so the digital stuff is not scary, and the interesting stuff is policy. I mean, that's what I like, but the number stuff I can read, sort of. And I think that's what we need, is that we need kids to study math more. We need to get kids learning to program. I was telling Jane before, I mean, there are certain skills that you need to get when you're young. I mean, learning a foreign language, I mean, if you don't get it by 13, 14, you're going to learn it but never acquire it. And same thing with math, programming, it's actually a logical language. It's a foreign language with no irregular verbs to memorize. So you have to, get kids doing it early. So we have a program where kids learn, we're still in a pilot phase, but kids start to learn to program at an early age, 7 or 8. I mean, it's a pilot program right now. It's not universal, but I mean, that is what you need to do. And you need to kick people to study hard subjects and not go study PR, because I mean, because the United States is probably the only country that's going to come out of this well, because all the smart STEM, science, technology, engineering, math students, they all come here. The rest of the world has to sort of do that for its own populations. You guys can import them all.
No. And then deport most of them.
Well, okay. On the sort of on the what I call disinformatia 2.0. Well, there was. I mean, there was this sort of active measures thing in the 1980s that this story that AIDS was invented by the CIA in Africa, and then they take the story and they plant it in the Hindustan Times, and then it gets published in some newspaper in Italy, and finally it reaches the New York Times. I mean, this kind of disinformation stuff has been going on for a long time. It is just far more pervasive and active today, and with when RT gets like triple the entire budget of U.S. broadcasting, we're not really dealing with it. I don't know what to do in the sense of, I mean, does it have an effect? Yes, it clearly has an effect. You can see that that in certain countries in Europe, ones that, for example, understand the word Putin verstehe, those countries, it does have an effect on the public opinion, and there is in a number of countries in Europe today, there is a willingness to understand the Russians and to dismiss kinds of things that were to happen to their country, they'd be rather upset, or were to happen to their neighbors, they would be upset. But since it's a small or large country far away about which they know nothing, then it is possible to do the things that are going on in Ukraine today. If you're going to look at this, I would say the place to start to understand is a brilliant paper by Peter Pomerantsev and Michael Weiss on the weaponization of information. And you can find that. I think it's published by Interpreter Mag, but it's this 35-page analysis of what has been done. It came out last October, so it's already somewhat dated, but it is the place to begin to look at this stuff more seriously. I would highly recommend Peter Pomerantsev's book as well, which is Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, which is kind of a subjective view of how all this happens. But ultimately what I would say is that it is authoritarianism taking over Briard and Derrida, this whole idea of nothing is true, which is intellectually a very interesting idea, and it's great for the seminars. But when you start applying it to politics and saying nothing is really true, and you have these completely equivalent narratives. It was a Buk that shot down MH17. No, it was a Ukrainian rocket or a plane. No, in fact, and this was used. No, they were already dead, and they just blew up the plane. Meaning, I mean, that was one of the narratives. So, and then and what it does is that it really comes down to sort of basically questioning the entire idea of what is true, what is something true, and then it's the ultimate stoned undergraduate discussion: what is true, what is not true. But when it comes to real lives, it's not so funny anymore. That's the problem. And so when you're questioning what is true, and you have and it's just as equally possible to have a plane that was filled with corpses that was blown up to discredit over Ukraine to discredit Russia, plus then you have all of the evidence that has accumulated about it actually being a Russian rocket. I mean, you can't say they're morally equivalent. So, I mean, fortunately, I mean, I would say the ultimate weapon is Karl Popper's falsifiability criterion. I mean, is it true? You can't say it's true ever, but you can say it's false. And we can say pretty much, well, that it is false that it was a Ukrainian fighter plane. We can say it's clearly false that it was, whatever.
But you know, we had a panel here last year on the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I, and a question was asked, what was the proximate cause of the war? Which country or which old empire was most responsible? And out of 4 brilliant historians, there were 4 different answers.
Right.
So not everything has one answer.
But on events, I mean, events.
Well, that was an event.
Well, okay.
Okay. Other questions? In the middle, I'm pointing to you, right there, woman, right there, yes. And then the second question will be near the front, right here, yes.
Kathy Kosman, I used to work on the OSCE mission in Estonia many years ago, and I had a question as to your excellent e-government, whether, since there are many Russian residents, I guess some of them are citizens if they speak Estonian enough, whether the information there is also available in Russian for Russian residents of Estonia. Thank you.
Well, first of all, everyone who is a resident of Estonia has an ID card. And government services generally tend to be trilingual. Most government services, there's a little Estonian flag, a little Russian flag, and then a little UK flag, because it's English. I mean, most services, yes.
Okay. Question in the middle, right here.
Hi, Alex Leibowitz. I used to work for the State Department, and one of the things I did there was multilateral arms control. And I remember sort of when this whole thing was, cyber stuff was getting started, the Russians were always often proposed the kind of arms control approach to it, and we tended to poo-poo it, that wasn't the right way of looking at it. And also, and this was certainly true, that part of their idea was to sort of censor things and so on. But I'm wondering whether you think there is any kind of sort of negotiated or, I don't know, international agreement approach to dealing with this problem. Obviously, it wouldn't affect the non-state actors and so on, but still.
I think that, well, the problem was there was too much content-related stuff to what they were proposing, and it wasn't that, because that's how you define a threat. I mean, okay, is a threat an attack on a whatever, you know, a power plant, or is it an attack on the integrity, the moral integrity of the president of the Russian Federation? You know, the problem was too much of a focus was on that, and as it was on things such as, you know, colored revolution propaganda, and use their term, but I mean, you know, reports of violations of freedom of speech and freedom of association. If that is a threat, then you have I mean, you know, that was the problem, and it remains a problem. And it's not only Russia. There are a number of authoritarian countries that would like to see what I would call well, as I mentioned, the Westphalianization of the web. I don't like the term Balkanization. I mean, I'm Baltic, not Balkan, but the point is that I mean, you know, I think it's a necessary demonization of that part of the world, especially on the 100th anniversary. I should say, by the way, someone asked me about Russian and residency. As of last year, we have a law where, in fact, you can get e-residency in Estonia. You don't have to live in Estonia, but you can get the ID card and all the services, even if you don't, not only are you not a citizen, you don't even live in Estonia. You don't get to vote, but you get all kinds of other services.
Wow. All right. We have 1 minute left, so we'll do a sort of lightning round here. The woman in the blue jacket right there. Is there somebody over here? Yes, you in the bow tie. And was there anyone else who was just dying to ask a question? Have I missed anybody? Yes. Okay, that's 3, and that's that. All right.
Thank you. I'm Audrey Alstead. I'm a fellow here at the Wilson Center. Mr. President, you talked about your pitch for teaching kids the STEM subjects. I'm wondering if you'd like to make another pitch for having them read the classics of Western civilization so they'd know Hobbes, Locke, Jefferson,
Awesome question.
Voltaire,
Awesome.
etc.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Hokinson. I'm an undergraduate at Stanford University. And so you're talking a lot about, the Hobbesian state of the web and sort of how you want this, like, social contract, it seems, that you want. But my thing is, with you go to Moore's Law, where, transistors are doubling every single year, where everything is advancing so much. Isn't a big part of, having a functional social contract that people are able to understand what they're dealing with and sort of, like, buy into this sort of thing? But if everything is advancing so quickly, these students, these youngins that you're teaching, are still going to be basically, behind the times when they get old enough to understand. And even, that's not even paying attention to all the adults who don't understand it now. So how do you deal with this problem?
You were doing great until that last piece. Okay,
Sorry.
last question over here.
Yeah, my name is Jan Siiter. I'm a visiting fellow at CTR. I'm from Finland, and Finland used to be the #1 in e-governance until Estonia came out along. My question is this possible in a big country to build a functioning e-government, or is this only a privilege of a small countries? Thank you.
Okay, first question. I'll answer you too. Is that at the same time, my son graduated Stanford. He just published. He just posted a piece in the Stanford, whatever, some Stanford Daily or something, but basically showed that the decline of sort of the classics, study of the classics in American universities, basically only mine, Columbia, and I guess St. John's, which is in Maryland, but that's only classics and no science or anything. That's what's left. Stanford, you have SLE, but that's kind of a small group of people. No more. People are no longer reading those things. They're not reading the math, and they're not reading the Aristotle, so it's kind of, and that's related to this issue, which just because I'm on this group doing this, I saw this terrible graph. It is part of the World Bank study that we're working on, and it has a picture of, there's a graph of Moore's Law, so it's a log scale. There's a straight line going up. I mean, it's not exponential, it's a straight line, so you know the math, right? And then it has, and then on the other hand, it has IQ, normalized to SAT. And just to make you feel better, just to feel better,
I don't think I want
ever
to know
since
the answer.
1975, the normalized SAT, which is at 400, is the median. The real score has actually been declining, but it's always normalized to 400. But in fact, IQ in the United States is declining. So the older you are, the smarter you are, probably. Finland.
Finland.
Well, Finland. I mean, Finland actually has the same system we do, but it's not. It's not used. First of all, the ID system is voluntary. Only 15% of the population has it, so you can't make use of it. You don't have the architecture. But actually, Finland and Estonia agreed in signing the first ever international treaty signed digitally between Finland and Estonia. We agreed that we would actually incorporate our services, or so that they would become interoperable. And my vision of Europe for the future, if we ever get it off the ground in Finland, is that right now we have digital prescriptions. I mean, we don't have 5,000 people die a year in the U.S. because doctors write badly. I mean, in my country, all prescriptions are online. You take your ID card, go to the pharmacy, stick in the card, and there your doctor has written you a prescription. You get your prescription. Finland has this too. Now, the smart thing to do would be that, okay, so you're a Finn, you come have a wild time in Tallinn in Estonia, you lose your medicine, and then you take your card and you go to the pharmacy, and there, the pharmacist says, okay, you get, this is your medicine, and then you're happy. And then the really smart thing to do would be to extend this A to other services, medical records, all this other stuff. And the really, really smart thing would be to incorporate, to have this system throughout Europe, so that if you go to Spain and you have a wild time and you lose your medicine, then you go to the Spanish pharmacy and stick it into your card in there. And then if we really want to do T-tip, then what you do is that when you come from Helsinki, Finland to Washington, D.C., and you have Okay, you go to New York and have a wild time.
Washington. Oh, you can have a wild time in Washington. Well, all right, we get the picture. We're over time. I know that all the polls in the U.S. showed declining faith in government in the U.S. I think President Ilves has just demonstrated why we don't need to have declining faith in government in Estonia. And I hope we will all applaud and thank him for a fabulous hour.